Welcome to Longevity Technology Unlocked, where we explore the science and tools that can help you live healthier for longer. I'm Dr. Nina Patrick.
And I'm Phil Newman, and today we're diving into a topic that really sits at the heart of health span extension for women: hormones, precision medicine, and optimizing long-term health.
From menopause and hormonal balance to biofeedback and digital health tools, these interventions can help women thrive through midlife and beyond.
And done right, these strategies can improve energy, recovery, metabolic health, and obviously overall resilience. And done wrong, they can obviously be ineffective and possibly even risky.
That's why we're thrilled to talk with two pioneers in female longevity, combining clinical practice, research, and innovative wellness strategies.
So we have Dr. Lara Briden. She's an expert on reproductive and hormonal health. And Dr. Molly Maloof, who is really at the frontier of precision medicine and biohacking for women. So before we get started, let's unpack the science. And could you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Molly, let's start with you.
Well, I'm a physician entrepreneur, author, and educator. I've written the book, The Spark Factor, and I have been focused on health span and precision medicine for the entirety of my career. So my work spans from solving very hard, challenging medical cases that have not been solved by mainstream medicine, to helping mostly executives, investors, and entrepreneurs have live healthy lives and live as long as possible without disease.
Wow, sounds amazing. And Lara, what about yourself?
So I'm a naturopathic doctor in clinical work for about 30 years, which is, I feel very grateful for all the decades of patients that have helped me do what I do. My main focus has been on menstrual health, hormonal health for women. And out of those decades with patients, I've written 3 books about periods and female hormones. My latest one was about metabolism. I've actually read your book, Molly, a few years when it came out, like a few years ago. So that's good for our conversation. And one of my messages, I'll just get it out at the start, is has been sort of questioning the standard use of hormonal birth control for women and the way that shuts down women's hormones. And I'll just point out, 20 years ago when I started questioning that was taboo, that was not allowed. And here we are in 2026, things have changed. I can say from the arc of history, things change. It's a lot more mainstream now to have many physicians across different fields saying, yeah, wait a minute, should we be routinely switching off women's hormones with hormonal birth control? That's one of my key messages. Yeah.
So before we dive into female health span and longevity, what's one personal fact that most people don't know about you? Lara, we'll start with you.
There's so many things. I'm quite a private person. I don't share very much on social media. So people probably know I love hiking. I live in New Zealand. I'm Canadian. But I guess one thing maybe I haven't shared a lot is I'm a big reader of literature, and especially kind of 19th century literature. So I was just saying to my husband the other day, I just need more friends that have read the books that I've read and just be able to immerse myself deeper in that world. So, and also the fact that I'm such a reader through all of my life, I think is why I love writing. So writing is one of at the moment where I'm in my career, I still see patients, but writing is my favorite thing.
So what's the last book you've read?
Yeah, well, I'm actually reading this monstrous book right now called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It's about magicians in the 19th century England. So it's actually, it's huge. I don't know why I've taken this on, but I'm enjoying it. So yeah.
I will definitely pick it up. And now, Molly, what about you? What's a fact most people don't know about you?
I have been making jewelry since I was a child, and I just got back from the Tucson Gem Show last weekend. So yeah, I have a lot of creative hobbies that most people don't know. I paint, I draw, I make things. Creativity is a big part of what's fun about life.
I used to live in Tucson, so I have been to the Gem Show many times. It's insane. I hope you really enjoyed it and picked up some good gems. So when we talk about longevity, typically the conversation always defaults to men. And I want to ask both of you, what does female longevity mean to you? And what are we really getting wrong when we apply this male-centric thinking and this male-centric model to women? Molly, maybe we want to start with you.
Well, one of the things that I discovered while being part of this major movement of biohacking and longevity in Silicon Valley was that a lot of the things that were working for my male clients were not working for me. And I had to learn the hard way. Being an early pioneer in the space, I realized very quickly that my nervous system was not designed the same way as men's. And I was trying to do a lot of the same biohacks that would optimize a men's health. And some of them actually did work for me temporarily. Like I was able to reverse insulin resistance using a certain amount of fasting, using continuous glucose monitoring. But when I was stacking too many biohacks on top of each other, I started burning out my adrenals. And I realized that I was tanking my hormone. I was really damaging my hormones. And so I wrote a book because I wanted women to be like aware that metabolic health is fundamentally the biggest driver of aging. If you have poor metabolic health, you're going to have more problems with everything, with hormones, with brain health. But we have to approach our bodies as women more gently. And we also have a lot of changes that happen starting in our 30s. And a lot of women begin perimenopause way before doctors have any idea they're starting to have hormonal shifts. And I think that we're entering a very new era where aging doesn't have to be so miserable for women. And frankly, we just got major news in the last year that hormone replacement midlife is actually likely to reduce risk of cancer instead of cause cancer in women. So I'm definitely of the school of thought that like birth control is not the same thing as menopausal hormone therapy, that like we're way over prescribing birth control in young women. We're giving super physiologic levels of estrogen, shutting off hormone systems. But midlife, when you start seeing your hormones shift and change, we've never had more tools in our toolbox as women to actually optimize the most challenging decade of our lives, which is perimenopause. And so that's something that I'm really excited to help women understand more effectively. And Lara, I just bought your book, one of your books, because I love learning from other doctors. And I'm a huge fan of naturopathic medicine.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So Nina, your question, what has, I guess, longevity or biohacking medicine missed with regard to women? I mean, for me, it's sort of a more fundamental question, because the other thing about me, which people do know, is my first job before I became a naturopathic doctor was as an evolutionary biologist. I published a paper back in the early 90s about sex differences in foraging behavior. So this has actually been on my radar for a long time. And I do a thought experiment. I like to reframe mammalian physiology, human physiology. The standard version of mammal physiology is female. That means the standard version is cyclic. And that is, to me, that's very profound. Women are not broken. Women are not a side issue that are it's actually men, from my perspective, from 35 years of biology lens, human physiology is cyclic. Males are the quirky variant. They make their hormones every day, like was such a weird thing to do. And also they, it's interesting because male hormones, testosterone is also quite variable, not on a monthly pattern, but certainly on in response to social cues, which I always bring this in because women are sort of perceived as being hormonally erratic. Somehow we're not erratic. I mean, there's a logic to our cycles, but male testosterone, this is a fun fact, testosterone plummets for 2 to 3 days after a man's favorite sports team loses. Not the team they're playing on, but the team they're a fan of. So that's been replicated a few times, which I just think is so fascinating. So, yes. So I'm just reframing cyclic as normal, as logical, and as in terms of, the recent history of the biohacking space, I still remember it was like maybe 15, 20 years ago, whenever the first Apple Watches came out. So the first time technology was tracking metrics, we're going to track, HRV and all these things. They totally neglected to track BBT, basal body temperature, and ovulation. And there was a big outcry within my space at the time saying, okay, look, you missed the number one most obvious thing to track in humans, which is that you can track ovulation and the hormonal cycles with temperatures. And they quickly remedied that, but it was still stuck in my mind as just an example of how female physiology has been sidelined.
Well, of course, I'm representing 50% of the world's population on the call today. So maybe could I ask you both? If we just start with you, Lara, as you've been speaking. Women on average live longer than men. We know that. what do you feel are the factors, and we'll get into health span later, but what do you feel are the things that are helping women experience those longer lives?
A big part of it, honestly, is the double X. So having two X chromosomes gives us an edge. I've read a few books about this. So it's at both extremes of life. So, in the neonatal unit, so premature babies are more likely to survive if they're girls. It's the double X. It's sort of quite, it's quite stabilizing for physiology to have those two options. There's a lot of genes on the X chromosome. And then also at the other more extreme end of life, I think the double X is part of it. I think part of it's part of it is going to be estrogen. Estradiol is, Molly mentioned the importance of metabolic health for longevity. Estradiol is during our reproductive years, and then potentially if we supplement it later in life, it does improve insulin sensitivity, enhance, support mitochondrial health. So estrogen's a bit of a metabolic superpower. I think I'm very grateful that we get to have it. Men have some estrogen too, of course. Testosterone has it's arguably a bit of a liability, I would say, in terms of longevity. I'm curious to hear Molly's thoughts on that. What would you see as the reasons for longer female longevity?
So I am a huntress. I hunt elk, and elk are matrilineal. So are orcas. And I'm a big fan of evolutionary biology. I've sort of accidentally become an organismal biologist. And I'm fascinated by the role of human connection and longevity. And it's something I'm giving a lot of talks on. We are meant to be pack animals. We're not actually meant to be isolated animals. And women have a much better track record of maintaining social connection as they age. It is highly, highly, highly linked to longevity because oxytocin is neuroprotective, mitoprotective, cardioprotective, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, literally is nature's medicine. It's likely behind the placebo response. It's responsible for social bonds, parent-child bonds, birth, orgasm. It's kind of an important factor. Women are more oxytocin dominant. So that's a theory that I have. Women tend to do much better if let's say they lose a husband, usually they end up doing better because they have such strong social connection. It turns out in happiness studies, single women without kids are actually the happiest in society, which is kind of fascinating. And I think part of that is their social connectivity. So I started studying social connection when I started studying the science of love, and I started studying Sue Carter's work and Helen Fisher, who sadly passed. And these two women became my mentors, and they're two of the most cited women on the science of love. And so when I started hunting and I started watching female elk, I didn't realize that the leader of the elk pack is the oldest female. And so the females actually protect the males when there's hunters around. They will run around them and they will protect the men because they do need to reproduce. So I was just fascinated by this facet of existence. And I think, I'm definitely not I wouldn't even describe myself as a feminist, but what I think is fascinating is women have so many advantages to aging in numbers because we stay so much more connected. The other thing that is interesting about women is we tend to spend more money on health than any other facet of society. We spend way more on health than men do, which is really funny because so many health products are marketed to men, but the real spenders in health are the women. So this is another reason why I'm so excited about this new age in women's health, because we're literally unlocking a massive economy of health optimization for women, run by women, designed for women. And I think we have unique needs. And I think more and more, if we start to recognize how much healthier we can be just in numbers, we actually won't need nearly as many products and services. We just need more. We need better and stronger community because it's so protective to our health and to our mental health and to everything. And so, community is something that I think is way underappreciated in medicine.
I love that you're a huntress. You should have mentioned that in your fun fact. I grew up in...
I probably mentioned that more. Yeah. I'm not a very good one. I've only been doing it for 2 years, but I really want to go to New Zealand to hunt because there's huge hunting in New Zealand.
Well, come to Canada. Where I grew up in Canada, where I go a couple of times a year, is rural, south of Calgary. So in the mountains, just across the border from Montana. We have... The elk are rampaging. There are so many elk, more in the recent year. I'm where are the hunters? We need to get these elk numbers
definitely go hunt the elk
out of control.
My boyfriend is Canadian, so I'm going to have to convince him to take me there.
Oh, yeah. Very
so,
intriguing.
Molly, you made a great point about women spending more for their health, although we still spend a large portion of our elder years in poor health as women. So what can we do other than maybe spending more on protecting our health? What can we do more to have a longer health span and spend more of those later years in good health?
I mean, honestly, the biggest thing that's on my mind right now is fitness, because I got mono in 2024 and it really tanked my VO2 max. And the two biggest factors that you really need to understand for your aging are your VO2 max and your muscle mass. And so your grip strength. And a lot of women, including many of my grandparents, unfortunately became frail and lost their muscle mass. I had a long conversation with my mom literally yesterday about this, trying to explain to her how important it is that she develop a more muscle-centric lifestyle and get a new trainer. Because if there's one place to spend your money, it's on building muscle. Muscle is so protective. Weight training is so fundamentally protective for your bone density. A big thing that will kill you as you get older is fall. And so loss of bone density, loss of muscle mass, it will creep up on you. And before you, like my grandmother, she had a surgery and she ended up getting prescribed Norco, quite a lot of it, and ended up frail because she was basically bedridden for a month. And then she ended up in a nursing home. And my other grandmother ended up having rheumatoid arthritis. And they used to tell people with autoimmune diseases, and 20 years ago, they said, oh yeah, don't exercise. These are, unfortunately, the medical system often misleads people and tells people, oh yeah, like this doctor told my mom from Mayo recently, don't do too much weight training. I don't want you to hurt your back. And it's like the whole point of weight training is to protect your back and to protect your core strength. So unfortunately, doctors are not educated on fitness. And I know this because when I was a medical student, I actually had to create an entire course on lifestyle medicine because it was missing from the curriculum of the largest public institution in the country, the University of Illinois. Now, it won me a bunch of awards, but sadly, we have not caught up. We are still not teaching lifestyle medicine across the board, across the country. So doctors are trusted for health advice when they actually have no business giving advice on fitness because they've never been trained. So unfortunately, we really need to teach women that it starts when you're young. It starts when you're a teenager. And I'm very fortunate. I was very fit as a teenager. It set me up for success later in life. But you have to maintain health and fitness through exercise. It's the number one anti-aging drug on the market. It reverses every single hallmark of aging on a cellular level. There is no better tool for anti-aging than fitness. And yet it's still kind of seen as, it's like, oh yeah, that's a whole, let's just go work out. Well, you actually need to have some metrics. And I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means. And we do get hit with challenges in life, and health is the ability to adapt and self-manage in the face of adversity. But if there's one way to really create more resilience on a cellular level, it's ensure that you get your VO2 max measured, get your grip strength measured, get your body composition measured, and have a baseline so that you know where you're starting from. And you can always improve. There's a woman who's winning ultra marathons, and she didn't start exercise until she was 35. So there's people who started exercising later in life and then are winning awards and masters exercise competitions. So this is something that's a main priority for my own health right now. But it's all about consistency. It really, really matters that you are consistent with your fitness endeavors.
So before I ask the same question to Lara, I recently hurt my hand, and I want to ask a question of how do I train my grip strength? What can I do to get this strength back?
I would first talk to your, I don't know how injured your hand was. I don't know if it was a break or a sprain or something. So I would definitely speak to your ideally if it was a major break or something, then you have to follow your physician's recommendations. But, I do farmer's carries at the gym. I do, there are these devices you can get that you can there's literally, you can get them on Amazon. There's a whole bunch of hand exercising devices, but I honestly mostly focus on dumbbells because it's easy. And I have a program that this trainer Brent gave me, and I keep doing this program. So dumbbells are great because they require you to use a strong grip. I like it a little bit more than machines because machines just don't require nearly as much gripping. but there's a certain amount of gripping involved. So I like dumbbells, but I would definitely start with like a lower amount for like, definitely like the most important thing is form and fitness. So like if you are finding yourself with a sore neck, or if you're finding yourself with like weird soreness in places you didn't understand, you probably are not using the right form, or you're using too heavy of weights. So there's no shame in using lower weights as long as you can maintain your form. And this is a big issue with CrossFit. I've seen so many people have massive injuries in CrossFit because they are using the wrong form and they're going too hard, too fast. So it's better to be safe and gradual with your progression in fitness than overextend yourself and injure yourself, because that's just going to keep you from, making more gains.
For sure. And Laura, what about you?
Yeah. So in terms of women having relatively more years of frailty compared to men, I agree with everything Molly said. I mean, definitely muscle centric is a nice way to phrase it. Also, I would say fully nourished, because obviously women also have the decades of trying to diet, low calorie diet, and also potentially, plant-based. I mean, I think because Molly's a huntress, I think they were on the same page that, I'm a fan of animal-based nutrition, in terms of not just protein, but all the accessory nutrients. And so I feel like in my metabolism book, I do talk about, for all the different reasons, and they're not always people's fault, we are undernourished across many in our modern food environment. The other thing I'll just point out is a kind of a statistical anomaly around, it's sort of around the, women have more years of frailty. I think that's true. But when you kind of dig down into the numbers, it's because women outlive men. So when men are in their final years, they have a wife who's cooking for them and looking after them. And this goes back to sort of social connection. Whereas because men often die first, women are left on their own. So they don't have occasionally, depending if it goes in a different direction, you do have a husband looking after a wife, but usually it's women are on their own or end up in homes. So I think that's just going to be an artifact of just the fact that we outlive men. But not to negate any of what we just talked about. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think, building muscle is, important. It doesn't have to be complicated. I'll just point out, just as a comment about if people are listening, thinking, oh yeah, I've got to get to the gym. My personal version of strength training, I like dumbbells too. I invested in some kind of heavier dumbbells. I'm a huge yoga fan. So what I do now is yoga, but then I pause the yoga session and I do some, squats and deadlifts and stuff. And then I go back to, so I'm kind of incorporating the weights into yoga, because I just can't put another thing on top of. Yeah. So there's different ways. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Some forms of yoga are fantastic for using your own body weight.
Yeah. Yoga is also muscle building, but you can weight it a little bit. Anyway, so there's different ways to accomplish it. Yeah. So I think that kind of covers a lot of it.
Is it Lara or Lara?
It's Lara. Yeah.
Lara. The animal. So it's funny. This doctor told my mom, you should just go vegan. And I go, no, please do not tell her this, because she's already got low muscle mass. And I'm just trying to explain, Mom, like when you're 65, you need 1.6 grams per kilogram protein. That is a lot of protein to consume.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get that if you are a vegetarian or a vegan. You have to be incredibly diligent. There's a great documentary called Game Changers, but what they don't do on this documentary is teach people how to eat a high protein vegetarian or vegan diet. They're prescribing these diets without giving any instructions on how to actually get there. And when I talk to my friends who are vegans and vegetarian bodybuilders, they're eating a ton of processed plant products. They're eating processed soy. They're eating processed wheat gluten. They're eating processed foods up the wazoo in order to get their total protein. So unfortunately, I am less of a believer in that kind of strategy, because it's just not actually doable for most people. But if you are going to be a meat eater, very important is you source things properly. I unfortunately discovered that the fish I was buying from the farmer's market has given me mercury poisoning. So even though I thought I was eating wild caught salmon and wild fish and I wasn't eating that much tuna. It's our food supply has got a lot of problems. So it's super important to source your food properly. Try to find regenerative meat if possible. There's a company called Seatopia. I'm not being paid by them to say this, but they do test their fish. And they work with the top 1% of fisheries in the world. And they do test all their fish for PCBs and PFAS and heavy metals. So if you are animal-based, sourcing is everything. And if I am able to get mercury poisoning, then a lot of other people are too. So it's really, really important to recognize that like our food supply is unfortunately pretty challenging to work with. You actually have to think like a hunter and a gatherer as a modern person.
I'll say one more thing about animal foods, just to give a little, I mean, at the moment, we're just alienating any plant-based audience. So sorry about that. But it's not just the available protein, it's the accessory nutrients. So specifically, it would be choline, taurine, and phospholipid inositol. So in my metabolism book, I sort of did a deeper dive into some of those, what I call missing metabolic nutrients. And it's not that long ago. So you go back so I was a kid in the 70s, and we were in our house, it's just a normal house. Like my parents were teachers. Like it's nothing, we were on a rotation of liver once a week is part of what you feed kids. And I mean, I'm through that lens, I do think organ meats they're a much richer source of some of those nutrients that we need for metabolic health and brain health. And I'm just curious, all the interviews I'm doing a little survey. Who was fed organ meats as a kid or still eats them? Like, do any of you guys, or have you gone back to it? Or pardon me?
I love making chicken liver pate. It's one of my favorite things to make, but I don't make it enough because it takes hours to make, but it's so good. But I do eat pate fairly regularly, I'd say.
Yeah. So same. We make pate in our house. What about you, Phil? Did you grow up on organ meats? I'm just curious.
Well, I'm loving the conversation. So yes, I did as a 70s too. I was my Sunday morning treat from my dad was liver sausage sandwiches, which were amazing. But interestingly, I became vegetarian when I was 16, and I continued all the way through till I hit 50. And at that point, I got chronic fatigue, and I realized doing all the endurance events and things that I was doing as well, that I was really on the wrong protein. And when I had my metabolic type done, I was absolute, omnivore. And I regret that. Obviously, I had my first steak when I was about 51. Okay, let's deal with the M word, right? So we're going to talk about menopause and also going to add in mitochondria there. Now, many women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, they have their labs are normal, but they don't feel good, right? So I guess we need to really understand, and both of you at the front end of this industry, but for our listeners and viewers that are really maybe in their 30s, maybe experiencing, as we mentioned earlier, perimenopause and not aware of it. What are your thoughts on really the diagnostics and understanding that we now have in the industry?
I mean, I am a huge fan of the Dutch test. I also do blood testing for clients just to get the mainstream, perspective on where levels should be. Always looking at the right time of the cycle, depending on which markers you're looking for. But Mira is a really cool company because they're making it very easy to do home testing for estrogen, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, and FSH. Which is we've never had an easier time of doing home hormone testing, and for the cost of one cycle map with Dutch from Precision Hormones, you could do 3 months of Mira testing. On top of that, there's a company called Ellie Health that is doing home salivary cortisol testing. So you can literally build your own lab in your bathroom at this point with home testing, which is something that I've always been a big proponent of. But I think the most important thing that women understand first is like, what's going on in my cycle? Am I having anovulatory cycles? Am I having low progesterone? Do I have corpus luteum insufficiency? Is there estrogen dominance happening? And a lot of women are just kind of flying blind by symptoms, but don't have any idea of what's really going on. If you track your inhibin B, if you track your FSH, you can actually see where you're at in the journey to perimenopause and menopause. And yet this is just not mainstream medicine right now to be checking these things. You have to really kind of go out of your way or go to a fertility doctor to get these assessments effectively. But it's really, really cool. There's this huge consumer movement towards more information. And there's actually been pretty good studies showing accuracy in Mira testing compared to blood tests. So I'm a big proponent of these companies.
Is that true for the estrogen test, urinary testing as well? Because I just have some concerns about patient or like individuals trying to pin down what their estrogen's doing with home tests.
If you're on hormones. So if you're on topicals, it's not going to affect the urinary hormone testing dramatically. But if you are on patches a little bit, they say, not a lot, If you're doing oral progesterone, for example, it's going to make your MIRA test results like extremely high because it's measuring the same metabolite of progesterone. Similarly, topical progesterone is not going to affect it as much. So it depends on if you're on hormones, or not, but most doctors will. And what I typically do for all my clients is I don't just trust numbers. I also take qualitative history. And that's the key, is you need to know, what does low or high estrogen look like? What does low or high progesterone look like? And also, what does low or high thyroid look like, or cortisol look like? You have to kind of look at the entire hormone cascade, let alone testosterone. So there's just so many players in this orchestra that you can't just focus on one single one.
I want to pick up on what Molly just said and just emphasize that for the audience. Clinical picture is very important. And because I certainly have seen some case studies where especially some of the home testing just does not make sense from a clinical perspective. So I would just start with the clinical picture. And I do a lot of testing as well. I do a lot of testing mainly around sort of thyroid antibodies, metabolic health, iron studies. There's a lot could be gained from testing, but I would sort of hang some cautions on the trying to track estrogen and progesterone with testing, especially in perimenopause, because the levels are very dynamic. And just to give, if this helps people at all, and is this is sort of a version of body literacy, is just that I love that term. It's knowing if and when you ovulate. Molly just said that. So knowing if you're having actual proper ovulatory cycles, and then if you're making progesterone, and how long your luteal phase is, which is your progesterone phase. It's not just your level of progesterone, it's how many days you make it for. And you can track that with temperatures. So giving a little plug back to basal body temperatures, which are easy to do now with wearables. And I still feel like that's one of the most powerful kind of cycle tracking methods we've got out there. And heading into perimenopause, the foundation is to understand your cycles. And if you even have been having ovulatory cycles, or if you're just coming from being on the pill with ovarian hormones suppressed straight into perimenopause, it's like, how do you navigate that? That becomes a more complicated question. But just as some guidelines or guardrail sort of signposts for people around estrogen and progesterone, classic signs that estrogen is high, spiking high, would be breast swelling, especially the kind of breast swelling that if you push straight back with your hands, that it sort of invokes some tenderness. That's classic high estrogen. That means your estrogen has been high during the cycle. If the period is very heavy, flooding heavy periods mean estrogen has reached very high levels at some point in the cycle. One key part of body literacy that I've realized a lot of my patients didn't understand, or a lot of people on social media don't understand, in a menstrual cycle, including in perimenopause, estradiol, our main estrogen, crashes down to menopausal levels at the beginning during the bleed. That's normal. In fact, it goes even lower in younger women than it does in perimenopausal women. So it doesn't even go as low once we get into our 40s. But the reason we feel the fluctuations so much is it's going higher. So there's a steeper drop. So I'm just offering some of those because, my experience of 2020, 2024, 2025 is there was, very strong messaging around estrogen. And to be clear, I'm in favor of estrogen supplement, potentially therapy, especially into the post-menopause years. So I think we're aligned in that. We talked about earlier about how estrogen can have metabolic benefits. But I've just talked to a lot of patients who are kind of chasing an estrogen supplement to help them with crazy heavy periods and breast pain. I'm like, that is counterintuitive. Like, estrogen cannot help with high estrogen symptoms. It can somewhat buffer from the trough at the end of the cycle. I hope that's making sense to people. Would you agree with that, Molly? Are you seeing patients that are a bit sort of confused about that too? Yeah.
I agree with all that.
Yeah. And just to point out, part of modern hormone therapy, of course, is body identical progesterone. It took literally like 30 years. Like back in the 90s, I was saying to patients, body identical progesterone is much safer. We've got to get you off these progestins. And now we can say now in 2026, I think everyone's come to the party on this one. Body identical progesterone is safer for breasts, arguably safer for heart disease, everything, has real neurological benefits on its own. So just as another little, when people are trying hormone therapy and then responding and not sure what's going on, if you slept like a baby the first night you ever took hormone therapy, slept like a teenager, I would say. Babies don't sleep that well. So I slept like a teenager. Then, that was the progesterone. Progesterone is tranquilizing. That's what needs to be taken at bedtime. So that immediate sleep effect is from progesterone. Estrogen arguably can help with sleep too, but it's longer term. It's like because it helps to regulate circadian rhythm. And the other thing, just while I'm thinking of it, that is going on in perimenopause that is contributing to brain fog, migraines, people walking around like they feel like a totally different person, is iron deficiency. We can put this in the show notes. There was a study that came out in 2025 saying at least 50% of the fatigue of perimenopause is due to missed undiagnosed iron deficiency. And it makes sense because periods, because of the high spiking estrogen and the lack of progesterone and other things going on like fibroids and, other underlying factors in our 40s, periods can get out of control. I guarantee there are people listening who are flooding, bleeding through their clothes. I mean, the acceptable maximum for menstrual flow over all the days of the period is about 80 milliliters. So, about 6 tablespoons. It's not unusual in perimenopause to be losing like 300 compared to 80. Uh-huh. So people will know what I mean. If you're bleeding like that, get treatment for it, which is, would be a podcast on its own, but progesterone can be helpful, or a hormonal IUD or something like that. And then get on top of your iron, because iron deficiency masquerades as mental health problems. It definitely causes brain fog, anxiety, sleep disturbance, migraine.
Not only that, I think a lot of women are running on, if you get your whole iron studies done, there's a lot of women with like 15 to 35 ferritin. And in Europe, they literally will treat that with iron IVs. And in America, you get looked at like a crazy person if you ask for an iron IV, if your ferritin levels are that low. And you can have normal iron levels, but that low ferritin alone, that low storage hormone, can make you feel deficient, can make you feel iron deficient. And so I started to really treat those low ferritin levels, starting with oral iron supplements first with vitamin C. And then if that doesn't repair it, then I will go to Venifer. Venifer has the main side effect is headaches, but all these doctors, we were taught in medical school that like it's so dangerous to give iron IVs because you could have anaphylaxis. It's so rare to have anaphylaxis from a Venifer. But if you're really worried about it, you can have an epinephrine pen around, but it's just so unlikely to happen. But I really feel like it's strange that European standards, if you're less than 40 ferritin, they're going to give you iron or iron IV. And in America, they don't even care. Now, for fertility purposes, you need ferritin levels above 75 to 80. And yet it's missed so often. I used to miss it. And I really, when I finally discovered that ferritin link to the iron deficiency story, I was like, oh my God, so many women are running low on iron and don't even know that they can have more energy.
100%. Can I give just on the iron story? Because so many things in medicine, there's the dark side. I'm with you. Like, I'm a fan of the iron infusions if women need them.
If needed, if they're symptomatic.
Yeah, if needed. So, getting your iron up, if you're deficient, and if I would say ferritin should be at least 50. So people have different sort of sweet spots. Yeah. It depends on context too. And you look at saturation, percentage saturation, and various, like a good clinician can look at the whole iron studies panel, not just looking at ferritin in isolation,
CBC,
but look at the whole,
and like everything,
the whole panel. But then in men and after menopause, iron has a very different personality. So then you start and it's also with insulin resistance, ferritin can be elevated, and it's complicated because ferritin can be kind of falsely elevated, not actually reflecting higher iron stores, but just reflecting inflammation. So there's iron studies. There's a lot to be learned from iron studies. So, and in context of the individual, but in terms of longevity research, our topic of today, for certain individuals, actually getting their iron down is important for longevity. And that is possibly, what are some of the mechanisms by which some of the different herbal medicines and interventions work. I saw one guy talking about how actually just lowering iron is possibly how, why we see a signal for plant-based diets or lower calorie diets, even in terms of longevity, is just get your iron down. Because I'm now 6 years post-menopause, my ferritin did creep up quite a lot. So I got I donated blood last year just to kind of get that down. So it's It's both. So it's not, we're not saying, I mean, we're saying iron is overlooked, hugely important in perimenopause usually.
You don't want it too low, you don't want it too high, you want it just right.
You don't want it too high. You don't just be like, oh, I'm tired, I'll take some iron. You really should get it checked out first.
There's a great company called DNAsupplementation.com, and they do this entire Fenton reaction genetics analysis and hemochromatosis genetics analysis. And so really understanding your iron predisposition. Like I had a male client that had some oxidative stress markers and a really healthy lifestyle. And the main thing on his labs was he had high iron. And so I was like, in your case, we got to be careful with the kind of meat we are eating. We got to actually give blood once in a while. And just making sure that we lower that iron because it oxidizes you. It rusts you. It both carries oxygen, but too much of that is going to oxidize you. So first principles are really important here is like understanding what is iron and what is it used and why do we need it, but why do we not want too much of it? And it's really about resting at the end of the day.
Because you guys asked at the beginning, why do women live longer? I mean, depending on who you ask, I talked about the XX, I talked about estradiol but actually having periods and pregnancies and running at a kind of lower iron level for decades is likely protective for longevity. So we have that superpower as well, but we also at the same time don't want to be walking around in anxiety and breathlessness and brain fog because we have too low. So
the Stride DNA and Biome test helps analyze key pathways involved in methylation and delivers a clear, easy to understand report with personalized insights and nutrient recommendations based on your biology. Now, most people take supplements without really knowing what their body needs. Stride helps change that by showing how efficiently your body is running its most important biological processes. So let's have a look at what's inside the box. Okay, so first impressions are great. It's a beautiful box. Arrived in the post via courier. So let's open her up. So you can see that we've got the Stride DNA test, which obviously has got lots of materials in there. This is the Biome test, which obviously I'll be taking later at the right time of the day. And then also under here, we've got some nice things. So we've got some exercise socks. This is the liposomal sachets, which I'll be taking from tomorrow. A very handy cap. And likewise, a beautiful moleskin notebook to keep my life in order. It also offers a daily supplement that provides balanced foundational support designed to work with your body. Visit getstride.com/unlocked to get your kit and use Unlocked for your 10% discount.
So Lara, you also mentioned menopause in your books as a human superpower. So talking more about ways that women have these superpowers. How does understanding menopause really change the way women should think about their longevity and think about their health span?
Yeah. So because again, so menopause as a superpower goes back to my evolutionary biology lens. So there are only a few mammals that go through menopause. I'm going to try not to do a whole TED talk on that because I realize we don't want to spend 20 minutes talking about this, but I'm pretty passionate about how, through my lens anyway, and the read of the literature, we evolved to go through menopause. In fact, arguably a longer human lifespan for both sexes evolved because women were selected for having longer post-reproductive years. So there's a book called The Slow Moon Climbs by Susan Mattern that had a huge impact on me when I was writing my perimenopause book. It's very detailed from an evolutionary biology perspective. So only read it if you're into that kind of thing. But she synthesizes all the different lines of evidence that we evolved to do this. And just from an evolutionary superpower perspective, so being a reproductive female is very energy hungry, super energy intensive. And it's a lot. Not just even having periods, it's a lot. Having obviously pregnancies, breastfeeding, it's a lot. And also as a species, human females could never just raise their babies on their own. We were a group. This goes back to the oxytocin stuff that Molly was talking about before. Look, we're a group species. And so there would have always traditionally had to be, and by traditionally, I mean like in prehistory times, there would have had to be a high ratio of non-reproducing adults. Well, adults to kids. So there have to be quite a lot of non-reproducing adults around to help the young women do what they need to do. And post-menopause women are perfect candidates for that because they carry so much wisdom. We know from modern day forager people like the Hadza in Tanzania, women in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s gather more food than any other demographic. They need less for themselves because their metabolism's kind of shifted down to a leaner version of it. And they give most of the food away to like the young women and the kids. And it's when the penny really dropped for me around that, I was like, this makes so much sense. I felt so empowered. Even though I'm not a grandmother myself, it doesn't matter. Like I come from a long lineage where women are, historically, if we're lucky enough to live through to our 50s, 60s, and 70s, we were super valuable for the group. And that's why these long-lived genes were selected for. And menopause is not an accident of living too long. We're meant to do this. And whether we then take hormone therapy or not in the modern world, I mean, that's fine. I mean, I take a bit of estrogen therapy myself, but it's not, the fact that we evolved to do it doesn't butt heads with the fact that we can also treat it. I mean, we can also optimize it, but we're not broken. It's not a deficiency state. We're adapted to this. We're meant to do it. My
Absolutely.
position. Can I say if we have time, I might say one more thing about the evolution of menopause, just because it kind of ties in with what Molly was saying about, like in the elk population, which I thought was fascinating, that the matriarch protects the males. So the only other species, there's a few other whale species that have an extended post-reproductive female post-menopause time, and those are orcas. And so what some of the scientists have, when they crunch the numbers and be like, why do females live so long after they're done having their own babies? It tends to evolve in groups where adult sons stay with their mothers. And so the female can kind of switch from making her own babies to, propagating her genes through her son. And in orcas, one of the things the matriarchs do is, help everyone find food and also stop their adult sons from fighting so much. Like just keep them alive, basically, which is, I think it's fascinating.
Great. Well, I guess we've been talking a lot about women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, which obviously is a real prime time for everything we're talking about today. What would you say, Molly, that you talked very eloquently about exercise. Beyond exercise, what belongs in a woman's non-negotiable longevity stack?
Well, aside from proper nutrient density, is the big thing is examining insulin sensitivity. So there are 12 hallmarks of aging, of which nutrient dysregulation, nutrient sensing dysregulation is one of them. And one of the biggest problems we have in our society is insulin resistance. It's actually like about 88% between 88 and 92% of the US population is metabolically unwell. And it doesn't mean you have to be obese. You can be lean and have lots of visceral fat and have insulin resistance. And so it can happen to anyone. It happened to me in my early 30s. So if I could be insulin resistant in my early 30s, and it could be anyone at any time, it's happening at younger and younger ages. We are seeing skyrocketing rates of prediabetes and diabetes. And insulin resistance is likely behind a lot of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and dementia. So it's something that I think everyone needs to be aware of. Everybody should. I pioneered continuous glucose monitoring in 2014 on healthy people. Healthy, meaning I thought I was really healthy and my fasting blood sugar was like around 100. And that's not good because I had some liver insulin resistance. And so I spent a big part of my career on metabolic health, because metabolic health is one of the biggest drivers of disease or longevity, if you get it right or wrong, or you get it wrong or right. So I really want people to understand the concept of metabolic flexibility. It's the ability to gear shift between fat and carb metabolism. Unfortunate reality is we're sitting a lot more than we used to in the past. We're not grazing in fields like animals. We are literally sitting in front of computers. Computers themselves will oxidize you with blue light. Sunlight is an antioxidant. So insulin resistance is not just driven by nutrition, it's driven by stress. And I have clients that have extremely healthy nutrition and have insulin resistance from stress-related, their stress-related lifestyles and relationships. And so I'm just such a crusader that people wake up to insulin resistance as a prelude to chronic illness as an older adult. And if you can reverse it when you're young, you can really reduce your chances of ending up with chronic disease. It's not the only thing that you can do. It's not the only thing you should do, but it's such low hanging fruit, and it is fixable, but you have to take it very seriously. And one of the biggest problems we have in our diet is we have way too many simple carbs, way too much sugar, way too much starch. We're just not using it. Like if we were using it because we were active all day long, be a different story, but we're not. We're sitting in front of computers. The kids are sitting in class and they're just not using the carbs they're consuming. And so we have these high blood sugar levels. On top of that, there's a lot of gut dysfunction that drives insulin resistance. Leaky gut is a huge problem, and it's totally overlooked by most doctors. Most doctors aren't even checking for it. So gut health is a very core foundation of functional medicine and naturopathic medicine, but it's still not understood by most mainstream doctors. So if you have a bunch of lipopolysaccharide getting into your bloodstream through your gut because you have leaky gut, you're going to have higher chances of insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is also driven by toxic burdens. I just found out, like I mentioned, I have mercury toxicity. Thank God I have healthy blood sugar metabolism, but it is causing some mitochondrial issues. And you can measure this through urine organic acids. You can actually see how heavy metals can be affecting your metabolism, affecting your mitochondrial function. Hormone deficiency can drive a lot of insulin resistance. So just being low on estrogen can make you less insulin sensitive. I actually had a client, really great story. Doctors were afraid to give her estrogen because she had a double pulmonary embolism in her 30s or 40s. And so I said, well, let's find out why you had the pulmonary embolism and let's figure out what we can do to mitigate that from happening. So doctors didn't do a workup on her PE. I found antiphospholipid syndrome. We got her on Eliquis. We got her on hormones. She went from a fasting insulin of 15, which is definitely insulin resistant, to a fasting insulin of 3 in 2 months. And the major change we made was not dietary. It was hormones. So I'm just like, understanding insulin resistance is a broad facet of an organism, whether or not it's able to adapt to its environment. If an organism is not adapting to its environment because of stress, because of toxins, because of the wrong diet, because of lack of exercise, because of sleep issues, sleep apnea is a big driver of insulin resistance, you're going to see the body less capable of metabolizing sugar effectively, less able of tapping into fat stores when you exercise or when you fast. If you bonk after fasting for 24 hours, you know you're probably not metabolically flexible. So the goal is developing a lifestyle that reduces insulin resistance and that improves metabolic flexibility. And anybody can do this. I wrote a whole book on the topic called The Spark Factor. It does take some effort, but it is one of those things where if you do have this problem, you have to manage it.
I was just going to say, I second the importance of insulin resistance. It's flying under the radar. It's hidden. And yet my third book is all about insulin resistance, metabolism repair for women. So there's a couple of resources there. And I take a similar approach, like troubleshooting. I look at, hormonal role of the gut, hormonal birth control. I do talk about our modern food supply. I know we're running out of time, so I'll just say a couple things. The reason insulin resistance is running like flying under the radar and not being picked up is because in a standard doctor's visit, you're usually relying on glucose or HbA1c as a way to kind of test metabolic health. And those are essentially useless, like close to useless. So Molly mentioned continuous glucose monitoring. I think there's a place for that, but also even more. Pardon me? Yeah, even that. The simplest as a takeaway, sort of, to encourage people to just think about their metabolic health and insulin sensitivity and whether they have insulin resistance or not. I would just point to 2 markers on a standard blood test that you've already had from your family doctor or GP, which would be fasting triglycerides and a marker called ALT. So triglycerides and ALT. So triglycerides fasting should be less than 150 or 1.7, depending on which scale you're using. And ALT in women should be less than 18 international units. It's actually, there's a fascinating paper. Again, we can put this in the show notes, correlating that specifically in women. And I don't quite know why in women more than men, but a higher ALT is as predictive of insulin resistance as a marker called HOMA IR index, which is a ratio of fasting insulin to glucose. So it's a very sensitive marker. it's more precisely, you want to be looking at the ratio of ALT to AST. And I just mention it because that's such an easy way for people to have a glance. If your ALT is high, if your doctor said you have fatty liver, that is almost always insulin resistance. I mean, there could be other explanations, so check with your doctor, but that's a really good, useful red flag to direct your attention to metabolic health. And before we sign off, I'm curious, Molly, what are your views, or if you're willing to say, on the role of high omega-6 fatty acids in insulin resistance, if at all? Where do you land on that currently?
My issue with omega-6s is the repeated heating of them. Yeah. So the fried foods, the processed foods, the foods that require these fatty acids to be oxidized. There's actually, I believe it or not, there's this product you can get from Canada called extra virgin canola oil, and it's like bright yellow. It's filled with vitamin E, but it's literally an extra virgin product, and it tastes like butter. It's actually delicious. I rarely consume this, but I did a lot of research on omega-6s, and I think there is a big problem in the way that there's like a war going on right now. There's like the mainstream, like, omega-6s are fine, don't worry about them. And there's the alternative world that's like, they're going to kill you. And I really became friends with the founders of Bio, and they really blew me away in teaching me about cellular membrane health. I went through a massive deep dive because I ran a prodrome scan after getting COVID twice and the vaccine. I started having some neurological symptoms, and I ran a prodrome scan from this company, Prodrome Neuro, and I had like radically low plasmalogens and phospholipids. So I had to do a massive repletion. But the craziest thing is that I ran an RBC cell membrane study from the Kennedy Krieger Institute because I was going deep into understanding how to measure cell membrane health, and discovered that my omega-6s were low and my saturated fats were high. And there's actually a problem I discovered in the world of the paleo world. And that's that because everyone's cutting out their omega-6s, they're now replacing them with saturated fats. And now we're getting stiffer cell membranes. And we're actually forgetting the importance of healthy omega-6s from things like flax oil, primrose oil, borage oil. Like, we actually need some omega-6s in order to have healthy, supple cell membranes. So the biggest problem, and I am an advisor of a oil company called it's called Zero Acre Farms. They make a bioreactor based monounsaturated oil, and like I'm all for monounsaturated fat. Monounsaturated fat seems to be the one fat that nobody can argue around.
I know,
but the thing about omega-6s is that if you heat them repeatedly and you fry with them, they are going to oxidize and they are going to be problematic. But using them as dressings, using them like raw, like the balance oil from Bio, is a fantastic way to get healthy amounts of omega-6s in your body. So I guess my argument is so much more nuanced because I fell for the paleo dogma that omega-6s are going to kill you, and then I ended up with low omega-6s. And it was not good for my neurological health. So that's my story.
Yeah, that's great. No, I mean, this is the thing about omega-6. It's actually an essential fatty acid. So it's an essential nutrient, as well as potentially problematic at very high dose.
Yes.
And
like anything else.
Through my lens as a biologist, like evolutionary biologist, we evolved on relatively low, not zero, but like relatively low omega-6. And in part of the modern food environment has been a huge amount of it. But I'll just point out canola oil. You can get canola oil that's high oleic, which is the high monounsaturated. And you're right about I've described, everyone agrees on the oleic monounsaturated. That's like in the Venn diagram of everyone. You've got the middle part, like we're all happy with olive oil, except I don't know what it's like there, but in New Zealand, olive oil is like $40 a bottle or something. So I just had a conversation with a patient saying, you could have high oleic canola plus butter, plus coconut. Like, you could mix it up a bit. You don't have to,
The thing you were saying about the omega-3 to omega-6, like, this is measurable. So like, for a lot of people, they forget that you can measure this stuff. I use a NutrAval by Genova Diagnostics. I can see, I see it all the time. I have some clients that are high in omega-6s and low in saturated fats. I see some clients that are low in saturated fats and high in omega-6s. And I'm trying to get them to balance. And that's what we want. We want balanced fatty acid makeup. We don't want too much of anything. We actually, it turns out, craziest thing I heard, we thought omega-3s were innocuous and healthy and you could just eat as much as you wanted. You can push your arachidonic acid levels so low that you become immune compromised if you over consume omega-3s. This is not an uncommon thing that I see now when I look on I see these people with these sky high omegas and they've got these arachidonic acid levels that actually are so low that they don't have enough of an immune response. So like, it's really much more complicated than like just picking a fatty acid saying, this is the one I'm going to go with. It's like, we need the entire constellation balanced. And, because most typical Americans are still consuming like heavy amounts of processed foods. Most children, 60% of their diet is processed foods. Most adults are still eating fast food for a large quantity of their nutrition. That is where you're getting a lot of these rancid omega-6s. And that's unfortunately why a lot of people aren't getting enough omega-3s. So it's a complicated story. It's really tough eating in a modern life. It takes a lot of education. It takes a lot. And even for me, someone who has a lot of education, I still have found myself with imbalances. So, it is unfortunately part of the reality we're living in. But the more you can get your nutrition to whole foods that are just actually whole kernel grains, whole seeds, whole nuts, whole, animals, the less you just get, the more you move away from the processed products, the better you're at.
So let's move us into, we've got to wrap up soon. So, Lara, maybe if I could start with you, if we do this right, what does female longevity care look like in the next 10 years?
Well, I would start again. I really have to go back to the younger women. So I did periods, perimenopause, metabolic health. I'm going back to periods. I'm revising my period book, but release it probably later this year because so much of longevity, I'll just point out, starts young. Would you agree, Molly? Like we build metabolic resilience and sort of metabolic reserve through the decades of life. So what I'm finding at the moment is this hyper focus on especially menopause, like how much hormone to take, like, all these debates about which hormone and how much to take. And I'm like, yeah, meanwhile, young women are going for literally decades with no ovarian hormone production. I queued up, we can put them in the show notes. I've got 4 articles, fairly recent, looking at big databases, like population studies of the fact that women with regular ovulatory cycles throughout their life, like reproductive decades, live longer. And so I'm like, the opportunity for longevity starts with kids, like not like Molly mentioned, like even children now have insulin resistance. So, I actually do feel like teenagers are kind of ignored in some of the current, so I guess that would be my finishing point not to say that nothing can be done. It's never too late, and build muscle and all the things and eat, be fully nourished. But look at the younger people in your life and realize this is where longevity starts. It's now for them. And those of us who were kids in the 70s, like I said, I was being fed liver. I never took hormonal birth control. So those were all set me up quite well, I hope, fingers crossed, for the coming decades. Like as a concrete example, achieving peak bone density in our mid to late 20s is crucial for bone health later in life. Hormonal birth control prevents girls from achieving that. So, I know this is bringing it back to my pet topic, but it really is shocking to me how ignored young women are in all of this. And it's just this lot of wishful thinking. It's like, that's fine. We can just switch off their hormonal systems. Let's hope for the best as they get older. So,
Molly, what are your thoughts on that?
I want to kind of break this into 2 categories because I'm both I've kind of straddled the world of the alternative functional world as well as the mainstream medical world. And I'm kind of also a major technologist. And so I spent a lot of time like understanding what are the limits of lifestyle and what are actually things if we really want to have quote unquote longevity. The reality is we're going to need biotechnology. So realistically, most people with a really optimized lifestyle, optimized social environment, optimized fitness, optimized nutrition, and hopefully good genetics, you can probably get to 100, right? Like that's a reasonable goal for the average person. Now, if we want to get to what's called longevity, like real longevity, like over 100 to 120, for actually that to happen, there's this researcher named Alex Zavarantov, who's one of the premier researchers in biogerontology. And he is firm that like lifestyle has a limitation on what we can get. So I'm actually more about health span. I don't actually care to get past 100 per se. Like I want quality of life for as long as possible, and then happy to, move on to the next life or, next journey. But I think what's really exciting is that there are quite a lot of big research programs dedicated to female longevity, and specifically, what can we do to slow down ovarian aging? And I used to be just like so focused on the lifestyle. And then I started learning about these companies like Oviva that are literally trying to figure out, can we delay menopause? So for every year, I think something like 3 years you delay menopause, you get like 13 healthier years of female life. So it's somewhere around that number. And that's what Oviva has been trying to promote, is like, is there going to be a way for us to delay the process of ovarian aging? And I think that is a big area of research that we will probably see a major breakthrough, just like we saw huge breakthroughs in the last decade in fertility, like huge breakthroughs. Like if you actually look at what we've been able to do for fertility in terms of egg freezing, and it's like we are in a fertility epidemic, and we've never had more fertility technology at our fingertips. So it's like kind of like a fascinating moment in female biology. But I think this whole extending female health span is going to be largely driven by not just lifestyle, but also some of these newer interventions that are coming. There's a lot of companies that are working specifically on different interventions that are addressing specific hallmarks of aging. Everybody seems to think they know the one that's causing the rest of them to be altered. But I'm actually putting a panel together for the Silicon Valley Economic Forum in May, trying to bring together some of the biggest names in these new biotechnological interventions. So I spent the last 6 months doing a deep dive on cellular therapies. And what people don't realize is that the cell therapy space is very much like a nascent space. It's very new. There's so many different types of stem cells. They have different properties. They have different origins. They have different capacities. They have different safety profiles. And I'm fascinated by the regenerative space. I think that space is going to have a lot more maturation in the next decade. But I think there's certain companies that are actually targeting telomerase and are able in animal studies to actually reverse telomerase levels to that of like your youthful years, like what your telomerase did when you were age 10, without causing increased carcinogenesis or cancer. So I've never been more flabbergasted and awed that like biotechnology is actually starting to really become truly interesting to me again, versus like there was a good decade I was just not interested in pharmaceuticals at all. And now I'm like, oh, there's a lot of stuff coming from this space that has real potential. There's actually a lot of Soviet medicine that is becoming mainstream in America. Bioregulators and peptides are definitely achieving major popularity, and I think are actually making a big difference in human health. Like the GLP revolution, whether you like it or not, has actually changed the lives of millions of people and will continue to. And it's just one of an entire class of pharmaceuticals that can be really seen as health span medicine that can improve mitochondrial function, like SS31, medicine that can improve libido, like PT141, medicines that can improve healing after injury, like BPC and TB500, medicines that can balance your immune system, like thymolin and TA1. These are not new medicines. These have decades of use behind them. And I'm just so excited that our modern medical world is starting to accept these. Unfortunately, it's cowboy medicine right now, and there's still a lot of problems with sourcing and quality. But if you can get around those problems, they are actually very safe if used properly. So I can only see peptides becoming a much broader role in the aging of a female, because they just work and they do such a good job at helping people heal and regenerate their bodies. So that's my soapbox.
Yeah, well, we're massive fans of what's coming down the line now with the biotech space. Absolutely. And we were only talking about Gamito last Friday about the work that they're doing. And there are a lot of companies in the space. So I'll run some data for you, and you can check out the list for your speaker panel, Molly. But
oh yeah, of course, that's great.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the conversation today. I mean, not for the first time in my life, I do feel like a useless male. And I don't think you two didn't even need a host and a hostess today. It was kind of like, it was incredible. So thank you for this fascinating deep dive. I mean, obviously, we've covered a lot of subjects today. So thank you both for sharing your insights.
Yeah, thanks. And great to meet you guys. Great to meet you, Molly.
You too, Lara.
Wonderful. So if you enjoyed today's episode, do follow the show and share it with someone who cares about their long-term health. So thanks for listening to Longevity Technology Unlocked. Stay curious, stay intentional, and do keep investing in your future health.